If there is a drug that humanity feasts on the most, I believe it's power and influence. Power and influence is a drug that humanity feasts on all the time and consumes and pursues, and it really drives a lot of our decisions. Throughout our world's history, we read about people that they did their best to conquer the world. It's pretty funny when you think about it and you hear it phrased that way. What does it mean to conquer the world? It's for us, it's really an ancient world, but imagine the pride that it has to take to think, I'm going to conquer the entire world. And it seems strange and far off to us today, but in an ancient world, this was something that was pretty common. That they pursued, and people would try to, the Greeks, the Romans, Hitler. World domination was a motivation for many of the people that we read about in history. But there was one person that seemed to have gotten the closest to conquering the world. His name was Genghis Khan. Not to be confused with your favorite song, Gangnam Style, but Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan was born in 1182 and was born in Asia and lived in these outskirts, kind of born into obscurity, not born into influence or power. He grew to lead one of the largest and greatest crusades and empires in the history of the world. What was unique about this empire that he led was that he united a bunch of nomadic tribes, outcast, unwanted people across Asia to become this incredibly powerful force in the world. This empire was called the Mongol Empire. At their peak, the empire controlled anywhere from 11 million to 12 million square miles of land, which is about the size of Africa. Just think about the incredible feat that he had to take through. This Genghis Khan gentleman that raised up these armies and captured enough land that would take up about the same amount as Africa. And he was just doing it with unimportant people around the world. But as with all great empires of the past, they end up fading off into the past, only to be written about and read in history books. Now, if you had the opportunity to conquer the world, what would be your plan? What would be your plan to conquer the world? Now, take sin and ethics aside. If you could dream with me for a moment, if you could conquer the world and you were in charge of the world, what would be your plan? First of all, I think you're probably going to find out who your prepper friends are in your life, and you're going to gather them up first, right? You have any of those friends? Maybe? A couple of them? You're going to find the person that has the giant armory in their closet, right? You're going to, again, this is not pastoral talk. We're taking side ethics and sin. That's off to the side for a moment. What would be your plan to conquer the world? Jesus calls his followers to do in this beatitude what I would say is the exact opposite of what we would do if we were trying to conquer the world. And he calls us to be meek. In fact, I would say this is that meekness, you wouldn't even recruit anybody onto your team if a character trait that they had was meekness, if you're trying to conquer the world. But Jesus, he calls us to this radical idea, and the reward is greater than we could ever imagine. If you're new with us, we've been in a series kind of early on in a couple of months series called The Way of Jesus, and we're looking at the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5 through 7, and we're in the Beatitudes right now. So Matthew chapter 5, verse 5, let's look at this Beatitude together. And it says, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." If I could think of one word to describe the exact opposite of what we see in our culture today, it would be meekness. Meekness is not something that we celebrate in our world. This word meek, in the Greek, is the word prius, which means as gentle or humble, considerate. All the things that, it seems like as we grow up, we kind of lose those traits in our life because we become jaded by the world, and we become jaded by the things and the situations that we experience in life. But this word, gentle, humble, considerate, meekness, all those definitions we would look at and we would say, yes, those are important in our life. We need to be gentle. We need to be humble. We need to be meek. We need to be considerate of others. But in reality, we rarely do these things. A good definition of this word meekness I heard this week was not to be overly impressed with one's importance. Not to be overly impressed with one's importance. Now, I think there's something inside of all of us as in human nature that we walk around and we want to feel important, right? We want to feel needed and wanted in our lives, whether it be in the workplace. We do it in church, right? Because we want to be seen for the things that we do. There's this human nature that can rise up in us when we talk about wanting to be seen or noticed. We want to be important. Now, for the gentlemen in the room, here's some encouragement for you. It's not really encouragement. Scholars believe that this is the hardest beatitude for men to receive. The hardest beatitude for men to receive when you think about that word meek, because it's not something like when you are being trained as a young man, like obviously parents don't have the time to share everything in their life about what they want their child to be, but that's typically not on the list. Like we want you to be meek because of our understanding of what meek is. But whether men or women, I think this is a hard one because it feels counter to everything that we want to do. And so as we think through and process this word meekness this morning, here's something that I want us to consider. If you're taking notes, you can write this down. Meekness does not mean weakness. Meekness does not mean weakness. Now, I understand, and I realize that quote feels a little bit cheesy. It feels a little bit like a motivational poster on your wall in your office, right? Meekness does not mean weakness. But sometimes we just don't need to overthink it. We just need to kind of go with where this is leading us. This word meek, it's one of the hardest words to translate from the Greek and into English, because the words don't line up just the way that you want them. Because when we think of meek, what is our first reaction? If you're a gentleman in a room, a guy in a room, your first reaction is like meek is weak. Like if you're walking around, that means you're going to get run over in life. You're going to get destroyed in life. You need to be a man and step up to the plate and take care of business, right? That's kind of the feel that we get. Like we kind of rise up. I don't want to be meek. But we have to understand that meekness does not mean weakness. If you are to be meek, that we would see that you're going to be soft-spoken. You're going to let people walk over you. You're going to get taken advantage of if you are meek. That these are the people that when in grade school, they would be overtaken by bullies because they're not strong enough. They're weak. But if we truly understand what Jesus is calling us to live by, we wouldn't see it as weakness. And really, as all these Beatitudes have so far, and as we will see as they continually will do, is that they fly in the face of our humanity. Blessed, does it say blessed are the strong? Blessed are the fighters. Blessed are the ones that stand up for themselves, the ones that fight back. It says blessed are the meek. Blessed are the humble. Blessed are the considerate, the gentle. In the ancient world, the context of Jesus' time, as the same with our world, meekness was not something that was valued. And so this word that Jesus is giving to the people on the side of this mountain by the Sea of Galilee would have been a shock to the hearers of the word. Because in the ancient world, they lived in an honor and shame culture, much like we do today. But if you had status and influence, if you had all those things, then prestige, power, influence, status, then you were honored as great. But if you didn't have power, and you didn't have status, and you didn't have influence in the culture, then you were seen as shamed. This is over 2,000 years ago, and as much progress as humanity has made in our world, humans are still searching for the same things today, aren't they? Influence and power, status. We think through those things, like we want those things, but here's what I want you to think about this morning. Over the last few, just an illustration, is the last few election cycles. I know no one likes to talk about politics, and especially in church, right? We don't like to do that. But the last few election cycles, as you know, the primaries are coming up and all these candidates have come up, like there's been moments and times where I like that guy. Like they're a good candidate. They have good policies, and they're like all the things that we want and see, but they never seem to make it through the primaries. Why? Most of the time we say things like, well, they're too quiet. They don't have the fire that we want in a candidate. You remember all those phrases? Like there were some good people. It was like, man, and this is, I'm not making a political statement of who you should have voted for or anything like that. I'm just saying, like, we don't celebrate in our culture today meekness. What we celebrate today is loudness and projected strength, right? We celebrate those things in our world. We might call it fire or passion or label it in some way that seems more attractive. But the way of Jesus is not to be lived out loudly in a sense of boasting, but it's to be lived out in meekness. Because the truth is this, is that we have nothing to boast about. As a follower of Jesus, I want you to hear me, we have nothing to boast about. As what Paul says, if I'm going to boast about anything, it's going to be boasting in the Lord. It's going to be boasting in his work and what he's done for me. This is the way of Jesus. Pastor Kevin DeYoung says this, that meekness is learning to be self-controlled instead of needing to be in control. Meekness is opening your heart instead of clenching your fist. Meekness is the firm resolve that it is always better to suffer than to sin. I love that last line. It is always better to suffer than it is to sin. It's better to go without than go without what we think we deserve than to sin. True meekness is willingly yielding to God first and to others second. And so as we think through meekness and what that looks like for our lives and how we can live that out as a follower of Jesus, how do we live out this idea of meekness? We yield our lives and our plans, our future, to God's plans for our lives. We choose his will over ours. And here's a good question that I think that we should ponder together as followers of Jesus is, am I living out God's plan for my life, or am I living out my plan for my life? Am I living out God's plan for my life, or am I living out my plan for my life? I'm not saying that those two can't run parallel together, because for many of you, you are living that out, right? But I'm afraid in our lives that we pursue our own dreams and our own goals so much in our lives that we miss out, many of us, on the call that God has on our lives. Are we yielding to God? Meekness is not weakness, but it's being strong and ruling our own spirit. Strong in choosing his way over our way. It's the way of the kingdom. It's choosing the way of the kingdom over the way of the world. Another aspect of this idea is yielding to others. If we are to be a people of meekness, that we will yield to others, not in a sense of passivity, because some of y'all might hear this and you're like, hey, listen, I don't think I'm just supposed to get run over and trampled all throughout life. I don't think that's what Jesus is saying, and that's not what I'm saying Jesus is saying. But it's in the sense that we know that this life, that we know that the life that always goes first is not always the best. We don't have to be first in everything. And I'm trying to find this balance in our family, because those that know me well know that how competitive I am and can be. We have this joke in our family. Lindsay won't even play like board games or card games with me because I get too competitive. Is anybody else like that in a room that needs confession this morning? Thank you for that one hand. I appreciate that. I just need to make myself feel better. But I'm trying to find this balance in our family, because our kids pick up on that competitiveness, right? Like they learn it, and they pick up on it. And so the kids have this game, and when we get in a van and we drive somewhere, and we're the cool family, right? We've got the van, we do the oils, we got it all. Like we're really, really pumping it up here. But we get somewhere, we park in a parking lot, and the van goes into park. The first thing that the kids do is jump out of their buckles and try to race to the front of the van to see who can get out first. We could be going to the doctor's office and they would still do the same thing. They have this desire, like, I've got to be first, and if I'm not first, then I'm missing out on something. And although that's silly and we're trying to correct that in our family, like, we do that same thing in our lives, don't we? We want to be first. We want to be the first to go. We want to be the first to receive something, first to get in line. If you don't believe me, let's take a look at the night before Thanksgiving every year when we go pass by a store on your way to your family, some family dinner, right? People have been camping out for days to get first in line to buy a TV. The way of Jesus says we don't always have to be first. We can yield to others, not to be passive, but to say that we serve the good shepherd who meets our needs, and there's no reason to rush to be first. A good example of this, or maybe a good testing place of this idea, and I can't believe I'm saying this because this is something I struggle with as well, is the idea of traffic in your vehicle. How do you respond when you're in the middle of traffic with your vehicle? How do you respond whenever somebody's trying to merge onto the interstate? Are you the person that rushes up to the bumper in front of you and you're like, nope, not getting over, not in front of me, because I'm going to save 0.001 of a second? Right? You know that idea, that thought, why do we have to rush everywhere in our culture today? Why do we have to get there so quick? Do we let people merge in front? It's a silly illustration, but think about it. Do we live our lives of like somebody's taking advantage of us all the time, where it's like, hey, you know what? Come on over. It's not that big of a deal. There's also a reason why we don't have church stickers here at Collective. We don't want our sticker on your vehicle as you're cutting people off. I think we should just print off a bunch of stickers of other churches and put them on other people's vehicles and see how that goes. Matthew chapter 11. When Jesus calls us to be meek, he's calling us to be like himself. Let's look at Matthew chapter 11, verse 29. Jesus says this, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle." Pause there for a moment. "For I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." That word gentle is the same word in the Greek that we see as meekness in Matthew chapter 5, verse 5 in the Beatitude. I'm gentle and lowly in heart. And so if we see meekness as weakness, then what we are saying is, in essence, is we are saying Jesus himself is weak. Now, there are moments and times that prove to us that meekness does not mean weakness. We see this in the scriptures. Jesus lives it out, right? He walks to the temple, sees the money changers, he flips the tables over. Doesn't seem like a very meek thing, right? It's like, okay, well, maybe we have a misunderstanding of what meekness is. There are moments where he'll drive people out or call out the Pharisees. There's moments of strength that they're public, visible strength that Jesus lives out for us. But Jesus is so good that he shows us where his real strength, and he models for us this idea of meekness but strong at the same time. Humbleness and strength. Think about this for a moment. When he was being beaten nearly to death before his crucifixion, the crown of thorns was being placed on his head. Or think of when he was being spat on, he was being mocked by the people. They're putting purple linens around him to represent royalty, like, yeah, you really are the king. And what does it say that Jesus did? It doesn't say that he retaliated. It doesn't say that he got angry. It says that he reviled them not. When Jesus was facing Pilate and he didn't give an answer to Pilate, although he could have, and he could have gotten out of this idea of being crucified, he didn't answer because he was yielding to God's plan. In each of those situations, we would not look at Jesus and say, Jesus, you are being weak. Or that Jesus is weak because he's not responding, or that he's showing meekness. No, we would say that his spirit was under control, that it was strength under control. Now, we live in this world today where everybody wants to be seen and heard. We've been given a microphone and a platform with social media. And although I love social media, I'm not anti-social media, but you just think about, we've been given a voice to be heard, right? Just think about how you feel or how we feel if we have a bad experience at a restaurant. 20 years ago, if you had a bad experience, you just didn't go back, right? Now what do? We go to the foodie group on Facebook and we share a bad review. We find Yelp and we're like, I've got to let people know how offended I was that I didn't get my food on time, right? We've been given a microphone, and so we want to be seen. We want to be heard. I'm trying to keep you guys from leaving bad reviews at restaurants. Can you hear that? You feel that? All right. Strength under control. Jesus shows us this better way to be humble, powerful, and submitting to the plan of the Father. And we have to ask ourselves, honestly, this morning, do we see meekness as weakness? Or do we see it in the way that Jesus calls us to do it, strength under control? Jesus gives us this other side of the Beatitude. He says that we will, those that are meek will inherit the earth or the land. Now, as a prophet in the time of Jesus' day, in the first century, in Palestine and Israel, there would be only one translation for what Jesus meant whenever he would say that you will inherit the earth or the land. This goes all the way back to the Abrahamic covenant, right? Where he promises Abraham that you're going to be a people, and you're going to lead, you're going to be a people, and the people are going to be led into this promised land that you're going to be cared for and loved on by the Good Shepherd. But these people would have heard, like, if we are to be meek, then we are going to inherit the land of Israel, which was overtaken by many people over time. But let's look at Psalm chapter 37 this morning as kind of get a little bit understanding of what Jesus is talking about here. This is a Psalm of David as he writes this in 37 verse 11. He says, "But the meek shall inherit the land and delight themselves in abundance, in abundant peace." The meek shall inherit the land. Jesus is quoting the Psalm of David. The son of David is quoting the Psalm of David, saying like the meek are the ones that are going to inherit this land. Now what's interesting about this message is that think about where Jesus is giving this message. He's giving it off in obscurity, far off from the city of Jerusalem. If you go to Israel today and you take a tour, they'll more than likely take you to Galilee, and you'll kind of see it's not really that close to Jerusalem. It's kind of far off. There's not big buildings like you would see in Jerusalem or the bigger cities. There's not as many people. Even today, it's not as popular. And so there's this message that Jesus is giving to these people that are kind of off in the distance, and all throughout their lives, and for generations, they had seen that conquering the land was only done by war and by power and by strength. The Assyrians, the Babylonians, now the Romans. The way that you capture, the way that you overtake, the way that you get the land is by brute force and strength. And Jesus comes to these people and he gives them this message of hope and shock all wrapped in one. And he says, it's not the powerful that will inherit the land, it's the meek. Notice this, is that it doesn't say the meek will take the land. It says the meek will inherit the land. It reminds us that this kingdom life is not about taking or doing, but about receiving. Some of you need to hear that this morning. The kingdom life, the way of Jesus is not about taking and doing, it's about receiving, because Christ has already done the work for you. Second thing is this, is that the way of meekness affects the present. The way of meekness affects the present. This inheriting that Jesus is talking about is more freeing than we could probably ever imagine. Because there is an aspect of land that we'll get to in a moment, but there's an aspect of the present that we have to understand that Jesus, I believe, is calling us to. I think there's multiple reasons for this. But it's this freedom and this idea, this freedom from the rat race of society to always have to be first, to perform the best, to climb the ladder of success, to have the most money, to have the most toys, and all the things that we can get so caught up doing in our life. One commentator I read said this, that the meek are secured under God's protection and even now enjoy his beautiful grace of God. And so there's no longer a need to rush to the ladder of success because you have Jesus. And I'm not saying that you can't be successful in the workplace. That's not what I'm saying or insinuating one bit. I don't think there's anything wrong with you being successful. I think we have to ask ourselves, what is our driving motivation for us to be successful? Is it selfish reasons? Then I would say maybe there's something inside of us that we need to ask the Lord to reveal to us. We have to realize and understand when we take this example that Jesus has given us of meekness and we tie ourselves to him, we yoke ourselves to him, this gentle and lowly heart, we realize that, sure, things of the world are nice, but they don't define us and they don't define success for us. So we free ourselves, as we live this meek life, we free ourselves from the pursuit of what the world would call happiness. Our level of meekness rises in proportion to our perception or view of God. I would even say that our level of meekness will rise in our proximity to God. If we are to become like Jesus, and we're to follow Jesus, not just show up to church and not just say a prayer, but we are to be what we call around here everyday followers. If we are to do that, then we tie ourselves, we yoke ourselves to him, we follow him closely. If we do that, then our meekness is going to grow. I heard another pastor say it this way, is that the smaller our view of God is, the more bravado and projection that we have to use to win people in their approval. But the bigger our view of God, the more meek we are, the more confident we are, the more confident we are in who God has called us to be and is creating us to be. So whether you are a leader in the marketplace or you're an employee in an organization, when we lead our lives with meekness, it's going to make a difference in the present because it's so counter to our culture. In a world that would say, cut people off or cut corners or beat this person out to the promotion, Jesus says, no, live your life in meekness and let the good shepherd provide for you. The third thing is this, is that the way of meekness promises a future. In the future, it's knowing that this promise that we see in Revelation, that we will reign with Christ for eternity. And Jesus gives us this promise not of ruling over a nation, but to rule and reign over the world. 2 Timothy, I believe it's chapter 2, and then Revelation chapter 20 gives this idea that we as believers in Christ, that we are heirs to the kingdom, that we will rule and we will reign with Christ. But here's some of the best news to me. That promise of ruling and reigning is not just for strong or the powerful. Here's the beauty of the gospel when Jesus is giving this Sermon on the Mount. He's giving it to a people that are sitting on the side of a mountain, living off in obscurity in this town of Galilee, and they're following around and kind of see what this movement that Jesus is ushering in this kingdom, what is happening and what is taking place. And he walks into this situation where many of the people that are receiving this message are not from power, they're not from influence, they're not from status. And culturally, many of the people that are listening to this message of Jesus don't even own their own home. These are people that would be considered the outcasts of society, the unimportant, the just kind of I've always wondered what it would be like to be an extra in a movie. You ever wonder that, or a TV show? Who are the people, you're working your entire life to be an actor or an actress, and they're like, hey, could you just come to the set and just walk down the street and show your back only? That would be awesome. Could you do that? That's kind of like the people that Jesus is preaching to, these people that live in obscurity. They're the unimportant, the unsuccessful in life. And Jesus says, it's not the powerful, it's not the strong, it's not the Romans, it's not any other empire or kingdom. It's the meek that are going to inherit the land. Jesus says, you, the outcast, the one that never seems to have enough, you're going to inherit the earth. Not because you will lead some kind of revolt, not because you're going to take up arms, but because you're going to live out the way of the kingdom in meekness. And in a world that it seems like a survival of the fittest many times. It feels like that at times, right? We've got to do and be and perform and do all the things. Jesus says, as a follower of me, there's a strong confidence that you should have that trusts and knows that I don't need to do anything else but rest in who Jesus is. On this beatitude, scholar Michael Green says this. Josh, you can come. It says that victory on this beatitude, it says that victory goes not to the wise or to the strong, but to those who are small before God. That God can afford to exalt them without the danger of their getting proud. And so as you hear that Jesus is giving this message of hope and future and inheritance to a people that are the unimportant, the outcast, I want to tell you this morning, not from a social standpoint, but from a spiritual standpoint, you are the outcast this morning. You are the unimportant in the sense that without the work of Christ that we have nothing to offer, right? We come even in our best effort, is what Paul says. It's as filthy rags. We lay it down before the Lord, and it looks like the rags that we wash our car with before the Lord because it doesn't measure up. So we are the outcast. We are the unimportant in that sense when it comes to our spiritual life. We live a life before God and we say, Jesus, without you, without your work, I have nothing to offer. Can the same be said for you and I? That We can be small or humble before God, that God can afford to exalt us without danger of us getting proud of, look what I have done, or look what I have accomplished in the kingdom? Or is it to say, I know that without Christ, the darkness of my soul, I know where I would be in my life without him and his work? Let's bow our heads this morning.